As we start to understand our own genetic makeup through DNA, we can apply those findings to things like Neanderthals so that we can begin to understand their behaviors too, through their DNA.
One place that DNA research may have led to more concrete evidence about behavior is with speech. The FOXP2 gene, discovered in 2001, has been singled out for language significance because it is missing in a small group of modern humans who have severe speech disabilities. The presence of the FOXP2 gene found in Neanderthal DNA suggests they may have had the gift of gab.
They surely had the ability to modulate their speech. They could, emit sounds. So they've had calls to help locate one another or indicate the vector of prey was taking as it moved across the landscape.
To date, much of the DNA evidence supports what scientists have learned from the fossil record, while confirming that Neanderthals were a different species of human. DNA fails to explain why they changed, or that change affected survival. Scientists still rely mostly on the physical evidence, examining every ancient clue to crack the ultimate cold case, the extinction of an entire species. One piece of physical evidence reveals much about the thought process of Neanderthals. Burial sites.
Caring for the dead, preparing the dead for afterlife, the amount of ritual that goes into it, these are important things. I mean, we do this. This is part of our culture. We do it differently throughout the world, but still, there's generally a recognition that this is one aspect that can represent religion, symbols, and so forth.
Neanderthal skeletons found in Israel and at other sites appear to have been buried and not just left out in the open. Paleontologists know that burial in other cultures usually signifies the presence of ritual or ceremony when someone dies. The belief is that this was a part of Neanderthal culture as well.
When that individual dies, you show respect to that individual's memory by formally disposing of the body. And you also have a ritual to bind over the social loss to some kind of soul in the social group, and that person is left.
Language skills. Family social structures. In the end, what scientists believe is that these were smart people who acted a lot like us.
Neanderthals were just like anybody else. They were nice to each other, they took care of each other. But they also had, their squabbles, and there are a few bumps and bruises where they obviously hit each other. They were like any social mammal or any group of living humans.
The most compelling argument against this idea that Neanderthals are incomplete humans is the fact that they were around for 250,000 years in the most challenging, harsh environments ever occupied by primates.
A major threat to the Neanderthals' existence was cold weather. Not only was the weather a factor, but hibernating animals meant less food. Starting about 70,000 years ago, glaciers moved down through Europe as far as northern Germany. This meant that Europe, between 30 and 40,000 years ago, was much colder than it is now. This brought weather similar to northern European countries, such as Finland. As the glaciers moved towards southern Europe, the Neanderthals stayed ahead of the weather by traveling south. Neanderthal remains have been found as far south as Iraq, Syria, and Israel. When glaciers periodically retreated, Neanderthals followed the warmer weather back up into northern Europe. And while Neanderthals hunted their way up and down Europe, a competitor was evolving in the Rift Valley of East Africa. Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa about 200,000 years ago. Traveling in the opposite direction from their northern counterparts, the Neanderthals, Homo sapiens in Africa would come up into the Middle East when it got warmer, and then retreat back into Africa when the weather got colder again.
When the Middle East is more like Europe, Neanderthals are there. When it gets hot and dry and tropical, Homo sapiens moves into the area. So early movements of these species up against one another may be determined by climate.
And when around 35,000 years ago, extended periods of warm weather arrived in Europe, Homo was only able to get a permanent foothold there. Life would never be the same again for Neanderthals. Like their Neanderthal cousins, Homo sapiens had also been adapting and evolving over the last 500,000 years. Physical differences, bigger brow ridges, wider faces, and larger brains were not the only distinguishing characteristics of the two species. Another important distinction between these species was personal adornment. It appears from burial sites of both species that Homo sapiens were into it, and Neanderthals were not. Neanderthal sites have almost no evidence of jewelry or other adornments. Does making art mean we were smarter than them?
The idea that modern humans might have had more sophisticated group alliances is frequently based on the notion that we see evidence in the fossil record that modern humans had a greater propensity for symbolic behavior, signaling, if you will, that I belong to this group and those individuals belong to that group.
Some scientists think this difference is overblown. Neanderthals may not have been big on personal adornment. This doesn't mean they were dumber than us.
I think the big mistake that you don't want to make is thinking that just because something's intelligent, it means that they have to act just like we do.
It's likely that there were many surface and psychological differences between the two groups, but there were probably many behavioral similarities as well.
There almost certainly were areas where Neanderthals succumbed and their populations crashed without ever seeing modern humans. And in other areas, they may have contacted them. They may have been aware of them. The nature of those interactions, difficult to say. Were they violent?
While there's no physical evidence that early Homo sapiens attacked and slaughtered Neanderthals, some scientists think they had a role in the extinction of the species.
Since moderns were in the picture, it probably is not a coincidence. That is, moderns probably had something to do with it.
There's paleontologists know for sure. These new visitors benefited by being more cunning and resourceful than their fellow predators, and they had some different ideas about how to survive in a harsh world. Those ideas may have indirectly killed off the Neanderthals. Some lethal twists had been added to the Homo sapien hunting arsenal, and these upgrades gave Homo sapiens a distinct survival advantage.
Neanderthals would just throw things off the shoulder like a javelin. But our ancestors would do these things. They would attach a little hooked stick like this onto the end of the shaft, so the shaft is flexible, and then hold the shaft with your thumb and forefinger more or less like this, and then just aim. And what happens is that this shaft lengthens your arm. It increases the speed of rotation.
Flinging these lightweight spears as they hunted their way across the continent, Homo sapiens used this new technology to improve their hunting success. It allowed them to attack their prey from a greater distance, and with heightened accuracy. Now, in addition to the big game they always hunted, smaller. Meanwhile, Neanderthals, using their same bulky weapons, continued to chase only bigger game. It may have been a costly decision,